Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention, please. Sorry to interrupt your in-depth discussions and the fellowship. Thank you. If everybody could take their seats again, please. Thank you. It gives me a great deal of pleasure to introduce and welcome my co-chair of the Leadership Dialogue, the Honourable Kim Beazley. And I'm sure that Kim needs no introduction to this crowd, but just by way of background, obviously one of the iconic politicians in Australia in serving the Australian people, and again having served 2 tours of duty here in Washington under governments in Australia of both different political persuasions and with great aplomb. And Kim has taken up the challenge with me of taking on the role as co-chairs of this organisation because of that deep-felt commitment to this incredibly important relationship. Kim is going to introduce our keynote speaker tonight, Admiral Mike Rogers. So please, ladies and gentlemen, welcome the Honourable Kim Beazley to the stage.
Well, thank you very much, Co-Chair. And on the basis of what Phil said earlier on, can I address you as fellow shareholders? It's a privilege to be here with you. And the fellow I'm introducing is definitely a shareholder. He's been a wonderful friend of the dialogue for a very lengthy period of time. You know, we've had our national security session today, and it was a very good opportunity and a well-populated sitting to go through what is the depth of the character of the military and security relationship between us, and how vital it absolutely is to the fundamentals of Australian national survival, but also useful to the United States as Americans pursue their global objectives, objectives that now engage us. We are currently engaged in 2 wars. We are engaged across the globe in a stance on security issues, not just only for ourselves, but the world generally. I mean, there is a reliance globally on people who have the will and the self-confidence and the capacity to be prepared to be of use when there is a threat to people's well-being, their values, their security. And the fact of the matter is that this alliance has been an important part of the fabric of that set of arrangements. It requires a lot of moral courage, it requires a lot of physical courage, and it requires a lot of intelligence, both on the part of the participants and the more normal usage of that definition. I first met the Admiral in Hawaii, and he has been an extraordinary servant of the United States, but his time there obviously attracted, or we attracted his attention to our particular needs and concerns. As I said earlier today, I was early in my political career introduced to the value that this town places on the presence of the United States military and their command centre in Hawaii. It is the focal point of their thinking about the military needs of the zone in which we inhabit. So an extraordinary, fortunate thing it was that a man of such great friendship and supportive attitude towards Australia should end up with one of the most significant and certainly the most technologically challenging positions in the American government, head both of their Cyber Command and of NSA. This is where the essence of the capacity of the United States is most exposed, if you like, to both in both its value to the military, but also its value to alliances. This is where the operation that he is responsible for is the operation, which in the first instance means that we can sleep peacefully in our beds at night. Or if we can't sleep peacefully in our beds at night, at least we're going to be told. So there's a habit of getting up at these sorts of gatherings, and it's a habit that poor Americans have to pursue more avidly than we Australians, and it's an expression in that habit which says, we have no better friend than X. And that's a safe statement when you sit down and think about it. But we don't have as good a friend as the man who is about to address us tonight. I welcome him and his wife are here to be among us, and I'd ask Admiral Rogers to come to the stage.
Well, good evening. How's everybody doing tonight? You guys good? Because I have to admit, this is a challenge as a speaker. We have Australians and Americans together, and there is alcohol on the table. So we're really got a challenge here. Before I share a few remarks with you, first, it takes a lot of work to make something like this happen. And so for those men and women who took the time to put together the dialogue and the dinner we're having tonight, I just want to say thank you very, very much. Now, in also doing it, I want to highlight one particular individual who I'm honored to call a friend, who I've known for about a decade now. But Julie Scanlon, who is both the vice chair of the dialogue and the dinner chair, had a lot to do and put a lot of time and energy in tonight. And no one will ever say anything publicly about it because that's the way she is. She just works hard, incredibly gracious individual, incredibly motivated. Every group wants to have somebody like Julie as part of its leadership team. Julie, on behalf of all of us, I just want to say thank you very, very much. Now, as you heard Kim say, I'm going to talk to you a minute about, I find myself now I'm the commander of Cyber Command and the director of the National Security Agency, so my focus with my Australian teammates is on national security, intelligence, and cybersecurity specifically. But one of the things that has struck me in my time, and one of the reasons why I personally have always felt so aligned with my Australian teammates is, to me, I have always felt we are among the most similar nations in the world. We both were kicked out of one of the best damn places at the time. Now, we went willingly. You guys, woo, you're a little different. But having said that, we both found ourselves thrown into a brand new continent. We both happened to land on the eastern side of the continent we were given, so to speak. And we marched our societies across an entire continent, carved out of the wilderness a society that reflects strong values. Those values also unify us. We're positive. We're loud. Compared to many of the rest of the world, we're loud, we're brash. But we're positive, and we believe in the power of the individual to make a difference. That if you roll up your sleeves and you're willing to work hard, there is no limitation to what you can achieve. And I think each of us recognizes that in the other and says, I like that. I'm familiar with that. It makes me feel like home. It's one of the reasons why I've always thought we are so aligned, not just historically, but in the very essence of who we are as respective nations and what we are. And over the course of our histories, we have fought in 2 world wars together. And in the dark days of the early months of 1942, in the aftermath of Pearl Harbor, and when the Japanese were on literally the doorsteps of Australia, our 2 nations committed to working together to overcome, at the time, an incredibly major challenge. And we each said to the other, we're here for you. And we did it at a time when each of us had significant challenges, and yet we recognized the value that each of us saw in the other. And we said, no matter how tough things are for me, I will be there for you. And that was almost 70 years ago now. And that trend has continued in an unabated way for all those years. As a naval officer, I tend to like historic trivia. In the 1940s, the only ship that the U.S. Navy had that was not named after an American city or an American individual was the USS Canberra. The only ship during the Second World War, not by chance, a reflection of that mutual sacrifice that we've had with each other. And now we find ourselves in a world where while we are literally in two different hemispheres, and we're literally almost at opposite ends of the globe, in many ways we've never been closer, because the challenges that we each face highlight to each of us how interconnected our future is and how much stronger we are when we are together. And you have seen that sense of togethered commitment play out in the fields of Iraq, Afghanistan, under really tough conditions. Coincidentally, I was just as part of my current duties, I spent a lot of time going to a lot of different places in the world. Everywhere we have, significant U.S. troops on the ground, I'm generally there once or twice a year trying to make sure that the teams I lead are doing their part to help our friends and our allies. And I happened to be in Baghdad it's hard to believe now that this particular instance was about 11 months ago, it was August. And it's about 120 degrees, and I land at the Baghdad airport, and I get out of my tactical aircraft, and I'm walking over, and I asked, hey, look, I'd like to sit down with the intel team at the airport before I head over to the embassy. And the Marines that are there, when I said, hey, I want to talk to the team about signals intelligence, the mission of the National Security Agency. And the team says to me, well, sir, if you really want to talk to somebody who knows what's going on, we got a young man you really ought to talk to. I said, hey, great, I'm always interested about value. I don't care what your pay grade is, I don't care what your rank is, I care what you bring to the table, what's the knowledge, what's the value you have. And literally, they bring out this young Australian NCO, and he and I sit down for about an hour and are just going over the structures that Australia and the United States have created within the signals intelligence arena to support operations in Iraq. And I turned to my team afterwards as I get on the helo, and now I'm flying over to the embassy in Baghdad. I said, you just won't find a relationship like this. I mean, think about how intertwined we are. Think about how much we depend on each other, but more importantly, the trust that we have in each other. I didn't care that it was an Australian non-American. I cared about this is an individual with value who is totally entwined in a partnership that at its heart is focused on ensuring the security and safety of our citizens for both our nations wherever they are in the world. And the problem sets that we're dealing with are getting tougher and more complicated. And increasingly for each of our nations, those problem sets are found right on our own doorsteps, right at home. That is one heck of a challenge. And it's our ability to partner together, and I am, as my teams constantly hear from me, the future is all about the power of partnerships. The problem sets we are dealing with are so complex, have so many different facets and complexities to them, that there is no one single group, there is no one single set of individuals that have the answer. It's our ability to reach out and create partnerships that really, to me, are the key to the future. And nowhere is that idea of partnership more evident and more lived out every day, all over the world, literally, than between our two nations. I hope every one of us today that's here tonight recognize the benefits that that partnership provides to each of us. It's so easy to take it for granted. We enjoy a level of mutual respect and teamwork that is the envy of most of the rest of the world. And yet it's just second nature to both of our nations. It's the way we are. It's the way we do business. You know, it's not by chance that Vice President Biden is on an aircraft heading west now to go down under. That's not by chance. The challenges we face in cyber, the challenges we face in the intelligence world as both of our nations attempt to generate insights to give us ideas and a view, a sense of what's happening in the world around us, that takes a lot of hard work. It takes a lot of dedicated men and women. Every time I'm in Canberra, every time I'm focusing, as I said, in Iraq, Australia, I'm meeting with my Australian teammates in Europe. I just was in a session with my Australian teammates in Europe because we're trying to make an argument. Can't we build on the partnership that we've created more broadly? Couldn't this be something that we can build off more broadly? I'm just struck by the power of what people can do when they put their mind to the power of possibility. And the dialogue to me is all about the power of possibility. 10 years ago, I found myself at the United States Pacific Command, that's the senior military commander in the US military, focused on the Pacific, and I was the director of intelligence for that organization. So I found myself on the US military side as the senior intelligence individual out in the Pacific, trying to help my boss understand what was going on out there. And one day, my four-star boss tells me, hey, Mike, we have an Australian team that's coming to visit. I'd like you to sit down with them and just walk through, what do we see out in the region? Little did I know that the power of the dialogue would create a series of relationships for me that 10 years later, I consider to be among the best things that ever happened to me, on a personal basis and on a professional basis. I constantly tell my American teammates, if you have spent any time serving in the Pacific, then you know the power and the importance of the relationship we have with Australia. And you don't ever forget that relationship. Within the structures that I'm responsible for, there are Australian individuals fully integrated into everything we do, and there are Americans down under fully integrated to everything that our counterparts in Australia are doing. There are not many nations that would be willing to make that kind of commitment, that would be willing to be so open with each other, and yet our two nations are. Because we have come to the conclusion, in literally of over 70 years of close partnership, that when we work together, as I said, we are that much stronger. And the dialogue is all about how do we perpetuate that relationship? How do we build on that strength? The military piece is just one small component of a much broader relationship between our nations. Trade, economy, ecology, the environment, technology, cyber, national security, intelligence. The relationship is so broad in so many dimensions. And the dialogue and what the dialogue has done in the last few days, for example, is a reflection of that. If you look at the agenda, you think about how broad it is. It's not just one issue. It's not focused on a particular niche. It's all about a broad set of challenges that drive the agendas of our respective nations. And it's also recognizing that this relationship is so foundational and so long-term that we need to invest in the young. And we need to build that future and that next generation. And that's what that young leadership idea is all about. How do we create that next generation who are much more open to the world around them and have a much broader set of experiences at their age than, boy, I ever did when I was that age. It took me a long time to get a little smarter about the broader world around me. And one of the best parts about getting smarter about the broader world around me was to get a sense for just what a mighty nation, both in what it has done, but I would also argue in its values, is reflected in Australia. I listen to the words of the Australian national anthem every time I'm at a place where it is sung, and I think, as a non-Australian, think about what those words mean. Think about what they represent. Think about the story and the struggle they embody. That is something incredibly powerful. Every time I'm in Australia, I'm generally down in Canberra because I'm talking to my counterparts. And every time I'm there, I always ask my team, carve out some time because I want to go spend some time at the War Museum and the War Memorial. And every time I do that, I'm struck by, look at the commonality of our experience. We both started out as small nations in a tough environment. And yet over time, we came to believe that there was a broader role for us on a world stage, that we could make the world a better place, and that there were principles and values that were worth fighting for. And we were willing to send our young women and men to places they had never, ever heard of to stand up for those values. And our two nations have been doing this together for over 70 years. There are few things as powerful as a nation that is willing to send its greatest treasure, its men and women, to stand up for what those nations believe. There are many nations who talk about those kinds of things. It's a much smaller set who are actually willing to do it. And as an American, I am proud to say that our Australian teammates have always been willing to do that. And it's been amazing to watch your journey as a nation. And it is amazing to say that we are friends and allies. And it's amazing to watch how that relationship has broadened. And look at the world we find ourselves in today. The problem sets, as I said, are getting more complicated. I focus on the intelligence and the cybersecurity arena. And one of the points I try to make to my counterparts in the Southern Hemisphere, we may be separated by two hemispheres, but when it comes to cyber, there is no distance. It's nanoseconds. And this idea that we can both stay on our continent with these large oceans around us and not have to worry about anything, that's just not going to work. And the leadership dialogue, to me, embodies the principles that are going to help us deal with this future. It's about the power of partnership. It's about reaching out to others. It's about learning insight from those who can bring value to a problem. And it's about focusing on the power of the possible and not telling ourselves what we can't do or what's too hard, too difficult. That's another thing I thought that always marks the nature of our two nations. We are societies at our heart that believe in the power of possibility and that an individual can make a difference. We're all about what we can do. We're all about trying to make that difference. We're all about committing ourselves to trying to make the world better. And the globe is fortunate to have nations that are willing to do that. And the challenges, as I said, are only growing tougher. But one thing as I look in the future, and I'll conclude my remarks because quite frankly, we got a lot of other people we want to recognize tonight and some other things we want to do. But as we think about that future, one of the constants as I look out is I know that there are strong partners that we can rely on. And I always tell my counterparts down under, you can rely on us. We will be there for you because I know you will be there for us. And with strong partners like that between the United States and Australia, there are no challenges, no problems that we can't deal with. It'll be long, it'll be complicated, it'll require us to make sacrifice, it will require us to be committed to fundamental values that we believe in and that we're willing to stand up and defend. But if you look at what we've done over the last 70 years, there's no problem out there that we can't help be a part of a broader solution. And the dialogue, to me, is symptomatic of that. It's all about driving to solutions. It's about driving to outcomes. It's about asking ourselves, what can we generate through the power of partnerships? And how can we understand each other better? And what we have done between our two nations, each of us hopes that we can broaden out to an even larger world. Because the entire world needs relationships like that, which is between our two nations. Thank you very, very much for your commitment to this dialogue. Thank you for the time you've spent. Many of you have come a long way. For those of you who join us from the Southern Hemisphere, I apologize, your body clocks are all out of whack. Not just time, but it's a hot summer here and it's a nice winter back home for you, so I apologize. But thank you all very, very much. Thanks.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Evan Feigenbaum, and I've been asked by Julie Scanlon to do two quick things. First, to offer to Admiral Rogers a vote of thanks on behalf of all of us in the dialogue at the dinner, but beyond that, all of us who care so deeply about this alliance that the Admiral talked about. And then second, to just very briefly connect what Admiral Rogers said about the centrality of this alliance to my own experience with what makes this dialogue so special. So first, Admiral, we know how great a friend you are of the dialogue, and this is actually, I've had several opportunities to hear you speak in dialogue events, and every time you really help, I think, Americans and Australians to appreciate the centrality of the alliance to some of really the toughest issues of our time, issues that you wrestle with every day, but that are, as you said, becoming increasingly complex. The connection between security and economics, between business and government, national security and commercial concerns, cyber openness and cyber security. And I will tell you, having heard the Admiral speak, including in Silicon Valley one time, that you are deeply committed both to public-private partnerships, which are so much at the heart of this dialogue with business and government people in this room, but also to international partnership, and we heard that tonight. Now, since you mentioned that you serve at Pacific Command, I first got involved in the dialogue I'm a longtime participant, in 1999. As a young Asianist, there wasn't a Young Leaders Dialogue then, but I was younger back then. And that was a time when Asia was very central to the United States and Australia both, and the region was coming out of both an economic crisis and a security crisis. The economic crisis of 1997-98, the security crisis in the Taiwan Strait. But even though you could see some of the pillars of the region beginning to change, a lot of the solution sets, as you put it, were still very traditional. But this alliance was still very central to that. Now, I would argue that over the last however many years, 18, 19 years that I've been involved with this dialogue, those challenges are becoming increasingly complex. At that time, economics and security were still very much in parallel. They're increasingly in collision in a region where economic integration and security fragmentation are beginning to define some very difficult challenges. And in that context, as the Admiral said, this dialogue and this alliance really will become incredibly central, and everything that you said, I think, really begins to capture that. Phil Scanlon may be the only person that remembers this, but in 1999, the dialogue began to do some other things besides just the dialogue events. We did an alliance review, of which I was the executive secretary, that came to some pretty robust, and at the time, controversial conclusions about where the alliance should go. In fact, those things look quite prescient now in the context of what we're dealing with now. And Admiral Rogers, you and everything that you work on every day, but also the wisdom, the knowledge, the insight that you've brought to every dialogue event I've ever seen you do, really begins to address that and the degree to which this alliance and this partnership make a difference. Because if these two countries can't get it right, then nobody can get it right. So, sir, we thank you not just for your speech, but for your service, for your commitment to the alliance, for everything that you do to help advance the U.S.-Australia relationship. Thanks so much for the privilege of being with us tonight. Thank you. Please join me in thanking you.
Admiral Rogers, can I join with Evan in, again, thanking you very much for your attendance, your insightful words, and a reminder and a reaffirmation of why we've been doing this for 25 years. Shared values, trust, mutual respect. And in recent times, those shared values have been tested on a number of occasions and never been found wanting. And we, on the Australian side, are certainly very, very proud of that. So can I now introduce the person responsible for getting Admiral Rogers here to speak to us tonight, the Vice Chair of the Dialogue and the Chair of tonight's dinner, Julie Singer-Scanlon.
Has been bothering me all night. Okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Julie Singer-Scanlon, Vice Chair of the Leadership Dialogue. Thank you all for coming. I hope that you're having as much fun as we are at our table. I first wanted to say thank you. None of these projects are single-handed, and we have a small team, but a very energetic team. And I'd like to acknowledge Cassandra Ben and Susie Reese-Jones, who put a lot of work into putting the dinner together with me. So if you could both be upstanding, and if we could give applause to both of them, that would be great. It's a great privilege for me tonight to introduce our 2016 Leadership Dialogue honorees, who are good friends of the dialogue and good friends of ours and mine personally. Dr. Tom Schneider and Ambassador Cynthia Schneider. Tom Schneider and Cynthia Schneider embody the spirit of the Leadership Dialogue. Leadership, as you have heard us say, is providing new space in the service of others. And our two honorees are world-class leaders in their respective fields and have demonstrated outstanding service to the Leadership Dialogue since its inception. Tom and Cynthia were founding U.S. delegates in Washington, D.C., where the first annual Leadership Dialogue was held. There is so much to say about Tom's contribution to the Leadership Dialogue over the past 24 years. Tom has been a valued member of the board of the Leadership Dialogue for more than 2 decades. He's been an early and strong advocate on our thought leadership platform of science, technology, and innovation. When we first met Tom, he was the chair of the Democratic presidential candidate Bill Clinton's Science and Technology Advisory Committee. Tom was instrumental in helping to develop the West Coast Leadership Dialogue, now in its 11th year. Cynthia Schneider was our 2016 Leadership Dialogue Scholar, which included extensive media, university, business engagements from coast to coast in Australia to advance culture and diplomacy. She is a Rembrandt Scholar who led a seminal Leadership Dialogue Academy on Rembrandt in 1995 at the National Gallery in Canberra. As a U.S. ambassador to The Hague, Cynthia was fully engaged with NATO in the most difficult defense issues of which she's been officially recognized. Cynthia brings the breadth of experience in soft and hard diplomacy to our Leadership Dialogue sessions, as we saw today. Tom and Cynthia have individually and collectively made substantial contributions to Leadership Dialogue. Their commitment has been unwavering, and for this, we recognize and pay tribute to them this evening. Please turn your attention to the screens.
Tom and Cynthia, so pleased to see this honour being bestowed upon you, and how deserved it is. You've been the heart and soul of the Australian-American dialogue over the years. A real understanding of the character of Australian society, life and politics that you bring to your consideration of us back in the United States. You have marvellous input into the American political process, and you use those opportunities on our behalf so well. You're also great thinkers about the relationship and great thinkers about international politics. And Cynthia, of course, you have such a fabulous record as a diplomat and now teacher. I can't think of anyone better suited or deserving of receiving this award.
Cynthia, it was such a pleasure to meet you when you were in Melbourne recently. I'm sorry you weren't able to come to Hobart on this visit, and I hope that next time we can welcome you to Mona. I was just in awe of what you've achieved in your career, starting as an art historian. As you know, I work in a museum, I'm an art historian. In my small way, I think about cultural diplomacy all the time, and to hear your wisdom about the power of cultural diplomacy on an international scale and its relationship to other international relations was just very inspiring. Thank you.
As we gather tonight to celebrate your longtime relationship with the Australian-American Leadership Dialogue, I'm reminded of the time over 20 years ago as we began the formation of the dialogue with you, myself, and Phil Scanlon, 1993, 1994. You brought a great deal of guidance, leadership, and initiative to the dialogue. Thank you for what you've done for this dialogue. It's elevated the relationship, and your involvement has been very important. Thank you, Tom.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Tom and Cynthia Schneider.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Julie and Phil, for this incredible honor, for your friendship, and for all that we've learned through these years of the dialogue. And, you know, I have to also thank you for giving us the excuse for so many great family vacations. You know, I mean, dialogue, American politics, Australian politics, this is all good and well, but how about those Australian beaches? I have to tell you that the first time I saw Broome, I said to Tom, I cannot believe that I'm this young, and you saw I was like a child. I can't believe I am this young and I am seeing paradise. And ever since then, I've been trying to figure out a way to finagle an invitation for a sabbatical in Broome. I haven't figured it out yet, but now that I know that there's a Center of Study of the Tropics at James Cook University, I have some other ideas. But more seriously, this award means so much to me because the AALD embodies the kind of person-to-person, people-based diplomacy that I believe so passionately in. And we've been talking a lot about the turbulent, unpredictable times in which we live, and that's true, but there are also times for incredible opportunity for connections across cultures, more so than ever before, because we live in this amazing age of 24/7 communication, global connectedness, citizen journalism, social media. We can hear the voices of the people from Canberra to Cairo to Chicago every day. And why does that matter? Well, that matters because we also live in a time when power has devolved. It's not just state to state. There are now many important non-state actors, some good, some bad. But we have the capacity to know what's going on, what people are thinking all over the world. And why does that matter? Well, you know, take, for example, the Arab revolutions. They were a big surprise to most people here. From the government perspective, things looked very stable, same old repressive dictator for 30 years. Underneath, there was a boiling cauldron of discontent, and it was accessible. It was accessible through the voices of the artists and the cultural leaders. Anyone who read the book, the most widely published book out of Egypt in the last decade, The Yacubian Building, published in many languages, knew that people at every level of Egyptian society, whether you were wealthy and educated or impoverished and illiterate, that everyone was miserable and repressed in their life, and that it was not a sustainable system. And so I think these voices, These creative voices are so important in understanding the world. And I have to tell you, my own experience has been sadly that they're not always recognized. These cultural voices are not always recognized for the important role they play. Sadly, one group does recognize them, and that's extremists. What do they do when they take over new territory? For example, when they went into Timbuktu in Mali, they banned music. Music is the lifeblood of Mali. It's how people communicate the past and the present. They understood that. They knew if they cut off music, and the musicians answered by saying, "You'll have to kill us first." But they knew that if they cut off music, then they take out the foundation of identity. The same is true of destroying the ruins in Iraq and Syria. You take away the sense of identity, the sense of pride, the sense of society, of unity, and then people are easier to dominate. And then you can impose your ideology. So I just would ask you, if the extremists understand that you need to tear down culture, to tear down society, why don't we understand that you need to build it up, to build up society and to restore resilience and strength? And what this means leveraging local voices. Doesn't mean sending American and Australian culture. It means leveraging the local, indigenous voices of culture. And that's what you have done for the last 24 years, Julie and Phil. You have leveraged those local voices so that we can all learn from each other, so that we can go to Australia and learn about Indonesia and Japan and Australia and all the Asia Pacific. And then hopefully the same thing happens when you come here. So I'm very grateful to you for this award and for teaching us all so much all these years. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm actually deeply touched by this, and the video was fabulous. So I want to thank Julie and Phil for their vision in creating this, because it was a vision. When I first got involved, as the video said, Mel pointed out before it started, I thought it was a great idea, and I thought it was important, but I had no idea that 24 years later we would be where we are. I also want to thank Phil Lader down here, because we were at Renaissance Weekend in 1992, and he introduced me to the Scanlons. And it was at that point in time that we got together and we really started talking about Phil's idea and Julie's idea to create this dialogue. So Phil, thank you for putting this together. But I think one of the things that Admiral Rogers took most of what I was going to say about the importance of the dialogue, so I will not repeat, and I'm between you and leaving, so definitely will not. But what I want to do is I want to pick up on a couple of specific points. He talked about Vice President Biden. One of the reasons Vice President Biden is going there first, there was a change in government in Great Britain. He did not go to Great Britain. He went to Australia. And one of the reasons is directly the result of this dialogue. And you saw a picture in there. There's a fellow by the name of Bruce Reed that we got involved in the 1990s. And at that point in time, he was the domestic policy director for President Clinton. He became the chief of staff for President Biden and was centrally involved in getting Biden a couple years ago when we were in the old executive offices building. If you will remember, for those of you who were around, Biden came in and talked to the group. Bruce Reed, I think his children were actually in the picture, is a patriot of Australia. And he is a patriot of Australia because of this dialogue. So there's the general concepts of the partnership between us. It is this dialogue and the discussions that have gone on and the relationships and the trust that over and over and over and over again pay back. There is high-speed internet in Australia because of this dialogue. So when we're having these conversations and you're having the informal discussions, it has a huge consequence, and Admiral Rogers pointed it out. I have my questions, and I don't know historically, and it'd be interesting to have the dialogue study it, Phil, as to whether or not in the 1970s and 1980s we fought the same wars, but did we have the same relationship that we do now? And my proposition is, my hypothesis is, our closest international relationship, the United States' closest international relationship in the world, and my apologies to Canada, they're our next door neighbors, so we take them for granted, but definitely Great Britain, which may soon not be great. My proposition is our closest relationship in the world is Australia, and we are doing things, whether it's the high-speed internet, whether it's science research, whether it is having the Vice President go down there as quickly as he did, that is the direct result of the relationships, the trust, the understanding, and the mutual awareness that has come out of this dialogue. I feel honored and privileged to have been involved in it. But my challenge for all of you is this was created, and you saw it in the pictures. We were much younger then. It was created to pass the baton to the next generation. And Admiral Rogers laid down the gauntlet. I'm going to be very specific. It is a very comfortable experience to come to this and to be invited back year after year after year. That's not what this dialogue's about. The dialogue is about the young leaders, the up-and-coming leaders in both countries. And it is unpleasant for us that have been around for a long time to not come back year after year after year. And when I stepped down from the board, or was asked to step down from the board, it was part of a process of transforming it to move on to the next generation. We, as the leaders in our generation, have to take the leadership to go out and find the new young leaders, to recruit them, to engage them, and then get out of the way. And I know that that can be sad, and I have Americans who come to me and say, well, I'm not invited back anymore. I sort of said, you know what, you understand Australia, you've got the relationship, get out of the way, we need to get new people in the way. So my challenge to everybody here who's over age 40 is to go out and find those new leaders, to bring them into it, and to build the generation so that the relationship is even stronger than it is today, and it's a very strong relationship today. Thank you very much.
Once again, please join me in congratulating Tom and Cynthia Snyder. Ladies and gentlemen, that brings us almost to the conclusion of the formalities for the evening, and I think we've done well time-wise. Yes, we've done an excellent job. We're right on time, so there's time for a bit more fellowship and enjoying those striker wines. That I think there's still plenty available, isn't there, John? There should be. Ladies and gentlemen, we've had a great evening, and again, just epitomises what we are doing here and the commitment we have to each other, to both of our nations. We had very strong and powerful messages from our leaders, from Vice President Biden and from Prime Minister Turnbull, both absolutely committed to the strength and the contribution that this dialogue makes to the relationship. We were moved with a tribute to a great mate, David Hale. We were certainly very much inspired and reminded and challenged about the future by the address of our keynote speaker, Admiral Rogers. And I think that we've all been a little bit moved by the presentation to our honorees, Tom and Cynthia Snyder, and the work that they've done to ensure that this organisation has continued to deliver what it set out to 24 years ago. And that brings me to the last sort of official duty this evening, and that is to invite everybody, and we're going to have the Premier of New South Wales do it officially, but invite everybody next year to the Australian American Leadership Dialogue in Sydney, New South Wales, Australia, for the 25th anniversary of the dialogue. And if we can just watch Premier Baird on the screen issue a formal invitation to everybody. Cynthia,
Australia
there are lots of great beaches in Sydney.
Been good friends. Now in Washington this year, you're there for the 24th, but next year we are going to welcome you here in Sydney for the 25th. On the agenda will be a number of things, not least of which global security, innovation, entrepreneurship. Plans to be an exciting time, and we're very glad and delighted to be hosting the 25th anniversary right here in Sydney. And whilst I wish you all the best in Washington, great city, I have to say, have a look behind me. Sydney's got to be better than that. See you here.
Excellent. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes a great evening. Thank you very much for joining with us this evening. Enjoy the rest of the evening. Enjoy the great wines that have been provided, discussion and fellowship, and we look forward to another very productive day tomorrow. Thank you and good night.